First Patriots, Chapter 9. While we waited for the bell that signaled the end of the fire drill, Liberty quickly exited the classroom. "Did you see the look on Liberty's face?" Cam asked as he started laughing. "So funny! He kept passing gas every time he took a step." "I know, right?" said Freedom with a big grin. "Even after he turned invisible, we could still hear him tooting all the way down the hallway." Their laughter was contagious. Tommy walked over and whispered, "I still can't believe you time jumped without me." Freedom replied, "Oh, I almost forgot. This is for you." Freedom handed Tommy her silver whistle. "I'm not much of a whistleblower, and since you couldn't come, I want you to have it. Paul Revere made it." "Wow, thanks, Freedom," Tommy said, and gave Freedom a giant grin. What did Freedom give Tommy? A spoon, a bowl, a whistle, a teapot. When the bell rang, Freedom said, "Gotta catch my ride. Bye. And thanks again for the field trip." "I'm still jealous that I didn't get to go with you guys," said Tommy to Cam. "It just sort of happened," Cam said. "Plus, you and Elizabeth got to time jump when you visited King George." "Speaking of Elizabeth, I didn't see her when the class returned." "Oh, yeah," Tommy said softly. "I almost forgot. I spoke with her outside while we waited for the fire alarm to stop. She kept talking about King George III and how excited she was to see him again. I told her I didn't think we were going back there, and she said, 'Yes, we are, Thomas.' Ugh, I hate it when she calls me that." "What else did she say?" I asked. Tommy looked around the room to make sure we were alone and said, "Ever since she came back from Windsor Castle, she's been acting really strange." He did his best Elizabeth impersonation. "Oh, Thomas, it's my destiny to return to England. I have plans, and they involve King George." "Hey, you sound just like her," Cam said and laughed. The two boys high-fived each other, and Tommy said, "So anyway, I asked her what her plans were. I told her maybe I could help. I was curious to know what she's up to." "What did she say?" Cam asked. Again, pretending to be Elizabeth, Tommy said, "Oh, Thomas, wouldn't you like to know?" Cam raised one eyebrow and said, "On second thought, you probably shouldn't talk like that. It's sort of creeping me out." Who wants to visit King George III? Freedom, Tommy, Elizabeth, or Cam? Tommy chuckled. Anyway, while we were waiting for the fire drill to end, a couple of kids were throwing a football back and forth, but one of their passes went wide. It soared like a heat-seeking missile, headed right for Elizabeth. "Let me guess. Kablam!" Cam said. "Yep, it was a direct hit. Her books and folders and papers went everywhere. As soon as those kids saw what happened, they ran away like a quarterback running from a linebacker." "I don't blame them," I said. "Elizabeth is a pretty mean linebacker." Anyway, I'm not sure what came over me, but I decided to help her gather her things, and that's when I came across this. He pulled out a folded piece of paper that was stuffed into his pocket. I saw the words "Top Secret" written on it, so I snatched it when she wasn't looking. He handed the paper to me. I unfolded the note and then smoothed out the paper. The note had a few words written on 3 lines. The first line said, "Jump to Great Britain." The second line said, "Impress the King." And the third line said, "Tell secret about BTP." And underneath that were several signatures. One said, "Queen Elizabeth." Another said, "President Elizabeth." And a third said, "Elizabeth the Great." "She definitely bumped her head back in the 18th century. She's nuts," Cam said. "What does BTP stand for?" asked Tommy. "British toilet paper?" Cam laughed and said, "Or maybe it stands for Boston Triple Cream Pie. I love a good pie." "That's something Liberty would say." "Wait a second. I think you're onto something, Cam." "I am?" Cam replied, confused. "You think Elizabeth's secret is about a pie recipe?" "No," I corrected. "I think her secret is about Boston. In particular, a secret event that will happen in Boston. A big secret that involves a lot of tea." "Oh," Cam said, snapping his fingers. "BTP, Boston Tea Party, of course." "Exactly," I exclaimed. "If the king knew about the Boston Tea Party before it happened, well, he could probably stop it, and it could be the beginning of the end of the American Revolution." Tommy raised his hand like he was in class. "What exactly is the Boston Tea Party, and why would Elizabeth plan something like that?" "Elizabeth isn't planning it," I said. The Boston Tea Party is a secret mission planned by the Sons of Liberty. Liberty has sons? Asked Tommy, surprised. No, I'm referring to a secret organization called the Sons of Liberty. It was a well-organized group of patriots who banded together to resist the British and unfair laws like the Stamp Act. The Sons of Liberty were sort of like Robin Hood and Batman mixed into one. When the colonists were burdened and suffering because of King George and his minions, the Sons of Liberty would come to the rescue. Their most famous operation was the Boston Tea Party. Cool, Tommy was smiling. I wish I could be a Son of Liberty. What else did they do, Mr. Revere? They once tried to persuade Governor Thomas Hutchinson of Massachusetts to reject the Stamp Act in his official letters to London. The governor was a loyalist, so of course he refused. In fact, Governor Hutchinson sent and received many letters to and from England. These letters made it very clear that the British were superior. King George and his parliament thought the colonists were sloppy and stupid, so they granted fewer rights to people living in America. What does BTP stand for? Boston Tea Party. Capital B, capital T, capital P. Simply, the letter said that Britain was better and America was bleh. Governor Hutchinson agreed, and that made the Sons of Liberty really mad. So they attacked the governor's mansion. They axed his door, uprooted his garden, and destroyed much of his home. Of course, they didn't harm the governor, but they told him that he didn't belong in America. Eventually, he left Massachusetts and returned to England. Okay, wait, back up, said Tommy. You said the Sons of Liberty were the ones who planned the Boston Tea Party. A tea party? I don't get it. I mean, my little sister likes to have tea parties with all her friends. I just don't see the Sons of Liberty doing that. Cam laughed. Not that kind of tea party, he said. I laughed as well and said, the best way for me to explain it is to simply show you. Awesome, Tommy said. Road trip. Let's go find Liberty. Yeah, it shouldn't be too hard to find him, Cam smiled. All we have to do is listen for someone cutting the cheese. Tommy chuckled and asked, seriously? Oh, yeah, he ate a boatload of beans in Boston. After 15 minutes, we found Liberty. He was waiting for us by the big oak tree near the back door of the school. Is everything okay? I asked. Let's just say I've been better, Liberty said with a half smile. Are you up to jumping again? I asked Liberty. Did the Mayflower make it to the New World? Did Benjamin Franklin invent the lightning rod? Was Paul Revere a master blacksmith? I think he means yes, said Cam. Whose house was attacked by the Sons of Liberty? That was Governor Hutchinson, capital G and a capital H. Governor Hutchinson. All the students and buses had left by now, and the schoolyard looked deserted. Here's a poster calling the Sons of Liberty to a meeting at 12 o'clock on December 17th, 1765. After Tommy and Cam climbed up onto Liberty's saddle, Liberty said, rush, rush, rushing to history. Swirling colors of purple and gold grew to the size of a hobbit hole. As we rushed to the time portal, I said, December 16th, 1773, Boston, Massachusetts, the Old South Meeting House. We jumped, and the next thing I felt was the chilled air. Were we in a field or a park? It was hard to tell since the only light came from the moon and the flickering lanterns and candles in a building straight ahead of us. It looked like an old church with a large steeple that stood like a single sentinel, keeping watch over the large crowds of colonists below. The boys quickly jumped off Liberty and put on their colonial clothes over their modern-day clothes. There must be 5,000 people over there, said Tommy. I nodded. We're about to witness another key event that brings the 13 colonies that much closer to their revolution against Great Britain. Can we get a closer look? Asked Cam. I want to hear what they say. As we approached the front doors to the meeting house, a man rushed outside and pushed his way through the crowd. He wore cream-colored breeches and white stockings, as well as a cream-colored vest buttoned nearly to the neck. His blue royal coat with golden buttons and gold trim hung low to his knees and reminded me of something a ship's captain would wear. The man was searching for something. When he saw us, he hurried over and said, "I'm in need of a swift horse. I'm Mr. Francis Roch, owner of the Dartmouth out of England. I've been asked to seek a pass from Governor Hutchinson so my ship might return to England with its crates of tea. May I borrow your horse? I expect to return shortly with the governor's answer." About how many people did they see gathering at the Old South Meeting House? 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. Before I could respond, Liberty was enthusiastically nodding his head. He looked excited for this unexpected adventure. I knew Liberty was a fast horse and would enjoy the task of an important mission. I finally said, "Oh, why not?" "Thank you, my good sir. I shall return shortly," said Francis. Within seconds, he was sitting in Liberty's saddle and dashing off into the night. I turned to the boys and said, "Let's squeeze our way into the meeting house." "I think the Dartmouth is the name of a ship," said Cam. "Yes, that's right. The Dartmouth is one of 3 ships that are sitting in Boston Harbor right now with hundreds of crates of tea from England. King George and Parliament are trying to force the colonists to purchase only British tea. In fact, the king has made his tea cheaper than anything else the colonists could buy." "Yeah, but he's also making the colonists pay a tax on the tea," said Cam. "More taxes?" asked Tommy. "King George doesn't give up. I mean, it's pretty obvious the colonies don't want to be taxed by England anymore. You'd think the king would have learned that lesson with the Stamp Act. History shows that King George III was not a very smart man." "Okay, but wait a second," said Tommy. "The guy who rode off on Liberty said that his ship can't leave the harbor without a pass from the governor." "That's right. You see, the Dartmouth arrived in Boston a few weeks ago. A tax has to be paid the moment the cargo of tea is removed from the ship. However, the colonists refuse to pay the tax and therefore don't want the tea to leave the ship. What is the name of the ship in Boston Harbor?" "That would be the Dartmouth, with a capital D." "What goods were on the ship, or are on the ship? Leather, silk dresses, tea, or furniture?" On Monday, January 1st, 1770, the Boston Gazette published a list of merchants who imported British goods into Boston despite the boycott. So everybody got together and decided that they would not buy any of the British imports, anything that came from Britain. But some of the store owners went against the agreement and bought stuff anyway. And so everybody was really mad at them. So they put their names in the paper. And to make matters worse, 2 more ships have arrived with more tea. So the Patriots, the colonists who are fighting for a free America, have posted guards around all the ships so that not one single crate is removed. They want the ships to return to England, but only the governor can approve such a thing. I get it. They want the governor to tell the king to go jump in a lake because they're not paying the stinking royal tea tax, said Cam. In a manner of speaking, yes. But the governor is not a patriot. He's a loyalist, remember? He supports the king. So I'm afraid Liberty will return with bad news for the Patriots. As we entered the front door, Cam said, "There's a great spot for us to the right in the corner." There was standing room only, so we shuffled across the wooden floor and squeezed our way over and against the back wall near the corner of the room. I immediately recognized Samuel Adams at the front of the large gathering. Just seeing him reminded me of his clever plan to use the Boston Massacre as a way to incite the colonists to hate Great Britain. He was always ready to get the Patriots fired up to fight against the British Empire. Tonight was no different. He was standing behind a podium with a firm scowl. He raked his fingers through his wild hair and then tried to get the attention of the raucous crowd. But the men in the room were arguing and yelling with each other. The sound was deafening, and the smell reminded me that underarm deodorant hadn't been invented yet. It might have been chilly outside, but it was warm and stuffy inside. "Gentlemen, order! We will have order!" Samuel demanded. Finally, the crowd calmed down, and Samuel pointed to a man who was sitting in the balcony. 3 pence a pound is a small sum to pay for tea, said the man who was surely a loyalist. How much was the tax on the tea? 3 pence a pound. Pence is like change, like we would say pennies, but not exactly the same, but it's a British term for coins, like we have pennies and nickels and dimes. 3 pence. It's not the cost that angers me, it is the tax that comes with the tea, yelled the patriot. I will not pay it. The tea tax is an insult to the citizens of Boston. The British Empire does not treat us as equals. We have no representation in Parliament. They think we are fools, children, and worse, slaves. Cam rolled his eyes and said, Ironic, isn't it? Indeed, I said. But we must pay for the French and Indian War debt, yelled the loyalist. If not for the king, we might all be speaking French. Tommy whispered, What does he mean by that? I whispered back. King George sent thousands of British troops to help the colonists fight the French and Indians. Without the king's help, the colonies would not have been able to defend their lands and defeat the French. The king wants the colonies to help pay for the war. That's partly why he's taxing them. The colonies believe they did pay for the war. Many gave their lives for it, but the king and parliament feel like the colonies still owe England. And that's why the king is taxing them, said Tommy. Correct. But as you can see and hear, the colonists can't agree on what's best for America. Sort of like the Senate and the House of Representatives in Congress today, said Cam with a smirk. When our leaders can't agree, well, it can lead to a government shutdown. I nodded sadly. Yes, you're getting a taste of our future government in this very room. Although it was cold outside, the meeting house was getting very warm, the crowd was getting louder, and some men started shoving and pushing to get their point across. Mr. Revere, Tommy shouted, maybe we should leave. The idea was a good one, I thought. Which war does the king want the colonists to help pay for? The Revolutionary War, the French and Indian War, the Civil War, or World War I? Unfortunately, we were boxed into a corner with patriots and loyalists on either side of us, who looked like they were ready to come to blows. Samuel Adams tried to retain order, but he looked just as angry as the rest of them. It was apparent that neither side was willing to back down. We should have the right to tax ourselves and keep it in the colonies, not send it to the king, said a patriot. And we must not let the tea leave the ships, said another patriot. Our colonies in Charleston, New York, and Philadelphia all refuse to accept the tea shipments. Boston must do the same. Suddenly, the owner of the Dartmouth rushed back into the assembly and yelled, I have news from the governor. He panted and said, He is not willing to send the tea back to England. He said it must be landed, and the tea tax must be paid. Patriots shouted with anger, and loyalists yelled in support of what the governor had decided. It was so loud I could barely hear my own voice. I yelled to Tommy and Cam again, Stay close by me. This could get ugly. This is like a Boston Bruins ice hockey brawl, said Tommy. Samuel Adams raised his hands to quiet the crowd, but without success. He looked like he was ready to explode. Hey, I have an idea, said Cam. He pulled out the silver whistle that Paul Revere gave him. Good idea, said Tommy, who pulled out the whistle that Freedom gave him. On the count of 3. They each put the tip of their whistle in their mouths. Cam counted to 3 with his fingers. 1, 2, 3. After a deep breath, the boys blew as long and as loud as they could. What did Tommy and Cam do? Clapped their hands, yelled at the top of their lungs, blew their whistles. A high-pitched sound sliced through the room like a hot knife through butter. The siren-like sound seemed to bounce off the old South Meeting House walls until all eyes turned toward Cam. Cam smiled and said, I think Mr. Samuel Adams has something to say. With gratitude, Samuel nodded at Cam, but he was in no mood to smile. With a stern expression on his face, he looked out across the crowd of patriots and loyalists and said, It is clear that we are divided among ourselves. I will say only this, gentlemen. This meeting can do nothing more to save the country. With that, Samuel Adams left the platform of the meeting house and slipped out the back door. I felt someone tap me on the shoulder. As I turned, I saw that it was my hero, Paul Revere. Come, he said. Samuel said the secret words. This meeting can do nothing more to save the country. We agreed that if and when he said these words, the Sons of Liberty would meet behind the Old South Meeting House. Tommy smiled and said, "Is it time for the Boston Tea Party?" Paul looked at Tommy and while raising his eyebrows said, "Yes, that is correct." He turned his gaze towards me and said, "Rush Revere, you agreed to be a Son of Liberty, did you not?" Yes, I did, I said. Paul smiled and slapped me on the back. "Good. The Sons of Liberty need good men like you. And your students are welcome to join us." "Awesome," said Tommy. He turned to Cam and said, "You can be Robin Hood and I'll be Batman." "No way," argued Cam. "You're Robin Hood. I'm Batman." Paul Revere interrupted. "Robin Hood is a legendary hero who fights to destroy tyranny. A bat is a creature that cowers in caves and spreads filth and disease." What secret words did Samuel Adams say? Use quotation marks. You may want to pause at this point so you can copy this. Quotation mark, capital T. This meeting can do nothing more to save the country. Exclamation mark, quotation marks. No spaces here, and one space between the words. In unison, Tommy and Cam said, "I'm Robin Hood." "I approve. The Sons of Liberty are very much like Robin Hood of Sherwood Forest." "Come, follow me," Paul said. We scurried along the wall and then through and around several men who were still arguing about what should be done with the tea. In less than a minute, we had reached the back door. We exited and found ourselves in the middle of 40 or 50 Indians. No, they weren't real Native Americans, but their faces were covered with red and black war paint. They had feathers in their hair, and many carried hatchets. Some were still in the process of changing from colonist to Indian, including Samuel Adams. "We need to change our appearance," said Paul, smiling. "Come, we have enough clothes for the three of you." I was thrilled to join the Sons of Liberty, disguised as Mohawk Indians, in a unified act against the British Empire. Cam turned to Tommy and whispered, "Dude, do you realize what we're about to do? We're going undercover. We're like 18th century special ops or Navy SEALs." "Except we don't have night vision goggles," said Tommy. "But this is way better than playing a video game. I mean, we're actually here in 1773 Boston, and we're about to be a part of history." "Yeah," said Cam. "Operation BTP, here we come." "This is going to be awesome," squealed Tommy. In a few minutes, we were all dressed like Indians. Well, sort of. It was a good thing it was dark, because in the daylight, I bet we looked more like Peter Pan's Lost Boys. In any case, we used coal dust to darken our faces and arms. I'm just glad it's not too cold tonight, or I'd be freezing. Who did the Sons of Liberty disguise themselves as? Robin Hood, Batman, Indians, cowboys. "I think I'll grab a couple of feathers for Liberty," I said. "I'm sure he's close, and I'll bet he'll want to join us if he can." Samuel Adams joined us as others formed a circle around him. Firmly, he said, "Tonight we send a message to the king. If his ships will not leave Boston, so be it. But we will toss his tea overboard and let it float back to England." Then Samuel let out a loud war whoop. Many other war whoops echoed in response as we began marching down to Griffin's Wharf, where the three ships, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver, were moored. Men shouted and cheered us on as we hurried down Milk Street. "Boston Harbor will be a teapot tonight," yelled a patriot, who slapped me on the shoulder as I passed by. The moon overhead was bright, and I was amazed at how well I could see. Was this a bit of divine intervention? Perhaps God provided the perfect weather and the perfect moon for what I hoped was a perfect tea party. Soon we were at the wharf, and I felt a cold breeze come off the water and into my face. It was dark and hard to see who might be looking at us. I could barely see the faces of the other Sons of Liberty dressed as Mohawk Indians. It was a little spooky, especially hearing the creaking and squeaking of the boats as the sea pushed their hulls back and forth against the docks. It was like the three ships were trying to warn the British Army. "Danger," squeaked the Dartmouth. "Look, thieves," creaked the Beaver. "Don't let them take our precious chests of tea," groaned the Eleanor. Within minutes, we were divided up into 3 different groups and ready to board 3 different ships. Suddenly, Liberty appeared out of nowhere and said, "Let's get this party started!" "Liberty!" we all shouted, excited that he had joined us. What were the names of the 3 ships loaded with tea? Check all that apply. Make sure you check all 3. Mayflower, Dartmouth, Nina, Eleanor, Beaver, Pinta, Santa Maria. "It just wouldn't be the same without you," Tommy said. "Here, let me attach these feathers to your mane. Now you're an Indian horse," I said. "I would have joined you earlier, but I was speaking with freedom, with my mind." "Wow, that's amazing," said Tommy. "I didn't think that would be possible once we passed through the time portal." "Neither did I," said Liberty, "but our connection has been getting stronger and stronger." "And what did freedom have to say?" I asked. "Oh, she just asked how I was feeling after eating all those beans. She was genuinely concerned about my well-being. That's what I like most about freedom. Well, that and also her name. Hey, maybe that's why we have such a strong connection. Freedom and liberty sort of go together, if you know what I mean." "Here comes Samuel Adams and Paul Revere," I interrupted. "It looks like they'll be joining us on the Dartmouth." Liberty sighed. "I'm just relieved we're not boarding the Eleanor. Seriously, I once had a great Aunt Eleanor who loved to suck on garlic." "Did you say suck on garlic?" Tommy asked. "Oh, yeah," Liberty said. "She said it kept away the vampires." "Vampires?" Tommy said doubtfully. "Well, vampire bats. Yeah, she was a strange old mare who would stay up all night watching for bats. I guess you could call her a nightmare." Liberty started laughing and stomping his hoof. "Get it? Nightmare?" "I am so funny," he whispered as Samuel Adams and Paul Revere drew near. "It is midnight," said Samuel. He looked up at the starlit sky and said, "It appears that heaven smiles down upon us. Yet there is still great danger. The British are all around us. Have a prayer in your heart that we shall be undetected. We must work quickly and finish before dawn." Tommy raised his hand and asked, "What if one of those warships sees us? What if a troop of redcoats catches us throwing the king's tea overboard?" "I know," said Cam. "I still remember what happened to me back in Virginia. They'll cuff us until they hang us." Samuel stared at Tommy and Cam for a moment. As all the men around us were listening, he finally said, "I believe God wants men to be free. I choose to believe that there is a force greater than our own here tonight. I can feel it in the air and see it in the stars. God willing, we will accomplish this mission. It is only the beginning of what we will need to do. Fear will try to stop us, but we will not let it. People who live with fear will never be free. Remember this, Tommy and Cam. We are the fear chasers. We are the hope givers. We are the freedom builders. We are the sons of liberty." I felt invigorated by Samuel's words. I felt unstoppable, like I could accomplish anything. I could see that the men with me felt the same way. Even Tommy and Cam looked ready to take on the world. Cam fumed and punched his fist into his palm. "Seriously, after what those redcoats did to me back in Virginia with Patrick Henry, I can't wait to get my hands on that tea." "It's tea time," whispered Liberty. We walked across the gangplank of the ship and joined the other Indians. Some were breaking open chests with hatchets to get to the tea. Since we didn't have any hatchets, Liberty kicked open a chest with his back legs, and the 3 of us jettisoned the tea into the water below. In the last paragraph, it says, Liberty kicked open a chest with his back legs, and the 3 of us jettisoned the tea into the water below. What does the word jettisoned mean? The 3 of us flew the tea into the water below. The 3 of us grew the tea into the water below. The 3 of us threw the tea into the water below. The 3 of us drank the tea into the water below. It was too dark to see much, but up close I saw thousands of little green tea leaves flitting down to the water and creating a sea of tea in the harbor below. Tea party indeed, a really big one. Maybe some of the fish thought the tea leaves were fish flakes and decided to make a meal of it. As Liberty stomped and kicked, he softly sang his stomp-back song. Because your taxes aren't fair, you make us so mad, and you should know that. You make us so, so mad. I kept looking over my shoulder at the docks to see if any redcoats had spotted us. The noise we were making as we busted open the wooden crates seemed loud, but it was hard to know how far-reaching it was. After nearly 4 hours, we had finished. I remembered from history that there were 342 chests or crates of tea. King George would be furious when word got back to him, and you know what? I was okay with that. After all, he did insult my mother. I think that's the last of it, said Cam. Now I know what you mean by the Boston Tea Party, said Tommy. Cam nodded and said, Did you see Paul Revere? That dude is strong. Must be from being a blacksmith, because he was smashing through those chests like they were made of graham crackers. Did someone say graham crackers? Liberty asked. I love graham crackers. Shh, I said, patting Liberty's neck. Here comes Paul Revere. Well done, Paul said, with a huge grin on his face. The Beaver has also finished dumping its tea, and I expect to hear word from the Eleanor soon. In the light of the moon, we silently rejoiced in our success, and I silently thanked God. What did they do with the tea that was on the ships? Unloaded it and stacked it on the dock, painted red X's on the side of the crates, broke open the crates and threw them into the water. So what's next? Asked Tommy. The king will not let this act go unpunished, said Paul. Certainly he will try to make an example out of Boston's rebellion. We need to do what we can to store food and supplies for our families. I would not be surprised if the king chose to close our ports. We must ready ourselves for England's retribution. I was still in awe by the fact that I was standing just inches away from the legendary Paul Revere. I mustered up my courage and said, Thank you, Paul Revere, for what you've done and what you'll do for this country. I don't know how you find the time to do all that you do to support the cause of freedom. Paul beamed at my compliment. He said, Rush Revere, you are a good man, and I am honored we share the same name. Freedom is in your blood. It is in the blood of every true American. It is part of who we are, and freedom needs our effort. It needs our attention. If we are not watchful, freedom can and will be taken from us. Paul breathed deeply and exhaled. He looked deep in thought and said, Only when we are free can we be all that God wants us to be. Only when we are free can we do all that God wants us to do. Remember this, my friend. Freedom is from God. And when we fight for freedom, we always fight on the side of God. Thank you, Paul, I said humbly. I will always remember you. I will always remember that. Godspeed. We parted ways, and after leaving our boat, we found an empty street and time jumped back to Manchester Middle School. The boys changed their clothes, cleaned their faces, and walked home together. I too changed from my Indian attire and was glad to be back in my colonial clothing. However, Liberty left the feathers in his hair. He said he was excited to show freedom. What did Liberty want to show freedom? Yellow clogs, a feather, a crate of tea, a new halter. I thought about tomorrow and remembered that it would be my last day before Mrs. Borrington returned. I knew there was still one more important history lesson I wanted to teach before leaving. The fact is, England was not going to give up, and the 13 colonies would not be able to withstand the power and might of Great Britain unless they united together. Let's face it, Boston, Massachusetts was getting beat up pretty badly. Other colonies would experience the same punishment from the bully of Britain, King George III. I wanted Tommy, Cam, Freedom, and yes, even Elizabeth, to understand that America's freedoms were hanging by a thread, and King George was ready to take his sword and cut us off from freedom forever. Our only chance, our only hope, was to unite with the other colonies and fight back. I wanted them to see and experience what really happened. For that to happen, I would need to get them to the First Continental Congress. We were just about to leave the classroom when a note was slid under the door. I walked over and picked it up. The writing on the front said, To Mr. Revere from Elizabeth. I had forgotten about Elizabeth's secret plan to leak information about the Boston Tea Party. All she needed was someone who could open the time portal. If she could go back in time, she could rewrite the history we had just experienced. And a personal visit with King George before the Boston Tea Party happened could certainly do that. Well, I wouldn't let that happen. I knew I had the upper hand because I knew what she was plotting. Then again, Elizabeth was both clever and crafty. Maybe this was all a setup. Maybe she had something else up her sleeve. Where are they going next? They are going to the First Continental Congress. Proper nouns, so all capitals. Capital F, capital C, capital C. One space in between words.